One day we'll have a real producer to do this. You guys can't hear it, but we got some cool funky music playing.
Nice.
Why isn't it live?
You said we're live on YouTube,
Yes.
so
Without that.
anyone watching YouTube is bored.
Yeah, probably. I got the music playing for them now.
Okay, that's good.
We can. I might have to restart that.
No, it looks like there are a couple people.
Are they on YouTube?
Yeah. Got someone named Jack Lowe saying hello. So hi, Jack.
Hey, Jack.
Oh, good thing I'm not on a plane. But
My son said that some of his co-workers were talking about the bomb, which is build of materials, is what they call build of materials bombs, right? So they were in an airport just discussing their bomb and how it had changed and what they needed to update and so on and so forth. Somebody turned them into the TSA.
oh dang.
And I said, well,
We're live now. We'll fade out of the music there. We're live on Facebook. We're live on YouTube. I think we're ready to go.
Okay.
So, for those of you who are on YouTube, you can see for yourself that we have. Actually, maybe need to change that picture here. Get you a better view of it. We've got Karen here. She's down here visiting. We're working on some important cases, particularly about medical freedom. So that's a topic of discussion today. So I'll just hand it over to them to get us started.
All right. Well, so you guys all know me. I'm Pete. I'm one of the attorneys for the Silent Majority Foundation. I guess I'll tell my version of the story, how Karen and I worked together and we met, and then certainly she can, tell the truth of the story as any good woman does, right? So,
Any good lawyer. What are you talking, woman?
woman lawyer, even more powerful. And so, a year and a half ago now, I met Scott Miller, physician's assistant down in Camas, Washougal, Vancouver area, for anyone that doesn't know the geography of Washington State. And Scott at that time had some disciplinary action against him. And I said, hey, look, I love what you're doing, Scott. He was literally extracting people. I mean, I don't mean physically, I mean literally. So I guess it's a different literal. He was getting people extracted from the hospital who were going to be put on remdesivir and some of the other protocols that seemed to be ineffective for treating COVID-19. And so I talked with Scott and I said, hey, look, where I can help, I'm happy to help. And he started talking about his disciplinary action. He said, look, I'm happy to volunteer there. And that is really fundamentally where I met Karen, because she and another gentleman named Klaus Snyder were working on the issue. I think, Karen, we maybe had some correspondence. There was a little quiet group of, I think, up to 13 attorneys, maybe 15 at one point actively in the state of Washington. Okay, let me restate that. 13 to 15 attorneys in the state of Washington who were interested in fighting COVID restrictions. Now, since that time, I've seen probably a handful, maybe 5 to 10 more attorneys who are doing work on the COVID-19 front.
But even out of that first 15, only a few of us really continued to work on it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'd say there were 5 to 10 of that original max.
That were actually active.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some have come and gone.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I said, it picked up maybe 3 to 5 to 7, 8 more over time. So, again, probably actively engaged in COVID litigation in Washington State at any given point is about a dozen attorneys.
Yep.
So anyway, I started working with Scott and met Klaus and Karen, and we had the opportunity to defend Scott's license last summer, and really got the opportunity. Enjoyed working with Karen. She's very intelligent. You'll probably hear that, or you will hear that today. You'll hear that, like any other good manager, hire better, more talented, smarter people than yourself. So it was certainly something I aimed up towards.
That's very kind. An exaggeration, but very kind.
I don't know about that. As good lawyers, will argue about that. But no, I mean, so we brought Karen on, and y'all also know that we've brought Austin on, and we'll bring Austin down at some point to talk about Second Amendment rights. But today's Karen's chance to shine. So anything you want to add to that story, or your story as to why, why medical freedom, why Silent Majority Foundation, and again, if you want to fill in some of the awesome highlights of the Scott Miller, you're welcome to do that, or just kind of move into what we're doing now.
Well, I'll start one question at a time, as we ought to do. So why medical freedom? Well, my background as a child actually started in the medical field. My dad was a pharmacist, and he was very involved, and he not only worked in the pharmacy, he was pretty active in the community as well. And he always taught us, even as a pharmacist, that medication was the last resort, that it wasn't the way toward health, that it was only to support your health until you could get better, if at all possible. So he did his best to stay away from medications. He had, interestingly enough, he had a heart attack at 56, did all of his research, and decided, okay, I'm going to go on this, and this, particularly niacin and a couple of other supplements in very high doses. So he had his doctor check his liver, but he was the one that told the doctor, this is how you're going to treat me. And he lived till 91 years old. And at the time, after having 5 bypasses, he was only supposed to live another 5 years. So what he did worked very well, and he followed his own advice. He would refuse to go on medicine, and when he did go on medicine, he weaned himself off. He weaned himself off of high blood pressure and medicine and all that kind of stuff. So that was a really good example for me, I think, in realizing that it really is the individual patient who is in control of their own health care, and it ought to be the individual patient in control of their own health care, and that the doctor is really there to support them in that and to help educate them through that. And to go beyond that into forcing people into doing certain kinds of health care is just improper and unethical. So as I graduated from high school, I met my husband in high school, my current husband. We've been married for 37 years. And his mother was a nurse. And I decided, well, I'll go into nursing. So I did that when I went to college. I went into nursing. Decided that ultimately that wasn't the field for me. And so my husband and I got married while we were in college, started having children almost right away. And so I decided to stay home with the kids, homeschooled my children all the way through. once they were done, then I decided to go back and go to law school. So that's where Scott Miller comes in. Through law school, I was involved in a number of foundations, nonprofits. I helped out at a Constitution Center my first year, after my first year in law school. The summer after my second year in law school, I interned at Goldwater Institute in Arizona, which was an amazing internship. Learned so much there. And then that first semester of my third year, the only thing I did was intern at Homeschool Legal Defense Association. So I got a lot of education in the nonprofit realm and in the public interest realm, which was primarily what I wanted to do after graduating law school anyway, was constitutional and public interest law. So when I got out, I worked at Freedom Foundation for a bit, for a few months, 6 to 8 months, and then decided to help out with another law firm, and then I opened my own law firm. And then COVID hit. And I realized that once they started reacting to COVID and forcing us to do all of this ridiculous stuff, that what they were doing was, just as my dad has said, it was completely unethical and completely illegal, and I had to fight it. I had to get into it. It took me some time to find other attorneys willing to do that here in Washington. As Pete said, there were only a handful of us, and it took a while to find each other. Because we're scattered all over the state. So I finally did find Klaus, and he was working on the Scott Miller case. It was an interesting case to jump into. I had never done a case in front of the Washington Medical Commission, which is a completely new and different experience when you get into the agency law, because they run things very differently than in the courts or any other legal realm. So that was a very new experience, and it was very helpful to have Pete come on because there was just so much to do. The interesting thing about that case was that it was clear these people were not used to being challenged, that when doctors were charged with something, it's clear that they were used to them just settling out, or if they didn't settle, they had very short hearings and just took their lumps and went on. But if we had done that, it would have been a really bad precedent. So we fought, and we had a whole week-long hearing in Scott's case, which my understanding is just doesn't happen. Of course, it happens now that we're in it. We've done 2 of them now, the same length. But I can tell you the AG does not like and does not think we need to have that long of hearings. But we have fought it, and we've made some progress.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, you and I have talked about this a lot, Karen. The importance of sharing how we've moved the ball, and I know I've not done as great of a job sharing that. I mean, to your point, just moving the ball of giving these people the opportunity to actually be heard, right? You know, It's not an open and shut. You're gone. You come and you go on a Monday, and then the commission decides your fate within a week because they only have, you know, a few pages of evidence or a few pages of transcript to live with, whereas we've intentionally brought these things and ensured that there's adequate witnesses. I mean, we treat it like a true trial. You know, other places where we've moved the ball, certainly they've changed their approach. And, you know, what are your thoughts on how that approach has changed? You know, specifically since our involvement, we've seen different statements of charge.
Yeah, so, I mean, I have not checked to be absolutely certain, but I'm pretty sure Scott's was the first case to come up under the COVID mandate issues. And so in his statement of charges, it was just riddled with free speech issues. Just uh, essentially everything they brought against him, are pretty close, had something to do with how he was speaking. And when I first came onto the case, that was the first thing I said to Klaus Snyder. I said, look, they can't do this. This is fundamentally speech, and they cannot regulate his speech. And so right out of the gate, we started fighting the speech issues. Now, when they made the decision, they did make some of the decision on speech issues, although they had backed off a bit from the statement of charges. Now, so we appealed that decision. We're still in the process of appealing that decision. So then we went on and we also represented another doctor, Dr. Wilkinson. And again, they had free speech charges in his statement of charges. Now, it wasn't as much as Scott's, but it was still egregious. It was still wrong. But it was a different approach at that point. They actually then went from pure speech to claiming claiming speech that can be, in some realms, can be regulated to some extent. But they were regulating it far more than is even allowed in that context. And so they had already changed their strategy at that point. But then when we got into the hearing for Dr. Wilkinson, the commissioners were very concerned. They made it clear through that whole week that they did not want to be regulating speech in ways that they shouldn't, which was something that had not even surfaced in Scott's case. Well, now we have two more doctors we're representing, and there are no speech claims at all.
So can we back up a little bit, because I'm coming from the perspective of the non-attorney at the table. When we talk about they, I think that a lot of the issues we've had we talk about they a lot. In this instance, who is they? What is it? Who is it that is coming after these doctors?
Well, so officially it's the Washington Medical Commission, but it is done through the Attorney General. The Attorney General's office is the office that actually writes up the statement of charges and essentially acts as prosecutor for the Washington Medical Commission. So those are the they we are talking about.
Okay.
And those commissioners, there are 21 medical commissioners, each of which is appointed by the governor. I think 17 of them, if I recall correctly, have some sort of medical background, either an RN, a PA, an MD, and then I think there are 4 public members, which could be theoretically any one of the 4 of us, aside from the fact that Jay Inslee doesn't like us. So so it's an interesting mix. We when we have these hearings, the commissioners in Scott's case, I think there were 5, and there was a good mix of I think 2 PAs, physician's assistants, and then 2 doctors, 2 MDs, 1 retired, 1 present practitioner, and then 1 member of the public. And then when we had Dr. Wilkinson's this spring, it was 3 members.
2 doctors.
2 doctors, I think 1 retired and 1 active practitioner, and then 1 member of the public. The distinction of needing a PA, a physician's assistant, was because Scott is a PA. And so that was necessary in his case and would have been probably like the icing on the cake in Wilkinson's case. But it was in spring and people wanted to be outside, not inside.
So this medical commission, what's their primary responsibility? Why were they put in place? What are they supposed to be regulating?
Well, they are to regulate the practice of law. So they're practice of medicine, forgive me. So they're to license medical practitioners, PAs, and allopathic doctors.
Okay.
Naturopaths have a different licensure process and a different board. And then they are there to make sure that at least purportedly, to make sure that these doctors are practicing in a safe manner.
So the intention was for them to make sure these doctors are practicing, not under the influence of drugs or in ways that would hurt people, right? Would really
Correct.
hurt people.
Correct. The standard under which the Washington Medical Commission is supposed to decide whether doctors are practicing in an unsafe manner is whether they've done actual harm or an unreasonable risk of harm. So that's a fairly high standard. In these cases, essentially what they are saying is that anything that they don't agree with is an unreasonable risk of harm.
Yeah, I mean, in the COVID-related cases, what we're seeing them say is, well, this person, patient A decided to use Scott's treatment. I mean, it was basically fundamentally the FLCCC's treatment protocol. And by using that, they could have gone to the hospital, which we also know to be untrue in some cases, right? A lot of these patients came early. In fact, let me back up. A lot of these patients came to the Scott Millers, the Dr. Wilkinsons of the world after the hospital had rejected them.
Had
No,
sent them home.
you're not sick enough.
Through yet.
Yeah, like you're satting okay. And what does okay mean? Like you're breathing on your own, right? And so the hospitals were rejecting these people. After 2 or 3 more days, they're still sick or getting sicker. And so they're looking desperately for some form of treatment. And, this is what has been coined as early intervention COVID treatment, right? And through this type of alternative treatment, the claim from the commission now is that person should have been in the hospital. And again, it's like, dude, you're looking beyond the facts that are squarely looking you in the face saying they being the patient, could not get into the hospital.
There was one instance in Dr. Wilkinson's case in which the patient went to the hospital 4 times, to the emergency room 4 times before being admitted.
Wow.
And then there was another guy in Wilkinson's case who outrightly said, do not treat me with remdesivir. And not surprisingly, what did he get treated with? Remdesivir.
Mm-hmm.
And he yanks, I mean, at least the way it's purported, he's no longer with us. He did pass, unfortunately. The way it's reported is he literally pulls IVs out, walks, and it sounded like he was not entirely lucid, down to the hospital or down to the front office, gets a hold of his wife, yelling at security and other folks because they treated him with a drug that he said, do not give this to me. And then he comes out of the hospital and gets alternative treatment and then ends up back in the hospital because at this point now he's day 12 or day 14.
Yeah.
And the frustrating part about these cases is we're hearing from the commission these questions like, well, why didn't you give monoclonal antibodies? Well, they weren't available. They just, in Yakima, I mean, anyone that knows the east side of the state, yes, we are more rural. There's more space between towns than the condensed west side, or at least the major cities. And we don't have some of the things that you're going to have in King County, in Seattle, or maybe even in your area because you're right across the river from Portland. And so,
well, even in Clark County, they were hard to find.
Yeah, I mean, so it's crazy that there's this fictitious standard of, well, you should have given them this, and it's like, well, yeah, if perfect world COVID doesn't exist, perfect world monoclonal antibodies are available, and everyone comes in, and we found even from the state's so-called experts, monoclonals were only appropriate, I think it was during days 6 through up to 10, maybe 11 of illness. And so again, when people are getting rejected for days from the hospital, and then they're coming with these other doctors, who don't have availability of these treatments. So,
well, yeah. And the thing about the monoclonals too, the patient who went to the hospital, the emergency room 4 times, the monoclonals were being given in the emergency room. Not once did they offer that patient monoclonals, but they were accusing Dr. Wilkinson of not telling him to go get monoclonals.
Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, you have to laugh, right? Like there's no other option.
Yeah.
So, kind of taking it back a little bit, sounds like what we have with this Washington Medical Commission is we have a group of people trying to practice medicine by committee and establish a standard of care versus what they were intended to be as just a governing body for misbehavior when it comes to doctors.
Well, and I mean, to your statement there of creating a standard of care, you know, the commission itself, and it was a portion of the commission early in the pandemic, it was September 22nd, 2021. They adopted a position statement. Now, I know this is going to get real law nerds, so I'm going to try and walk somewhat slowly through it for everyone that listens and watches. A position statement is the regulatory body, in this case, the medical commission's statement of what current law or other adopted standard is. So it's a non-binding statement.
Yep.
But when this COVID-19 misinformation position statement was adopted, it did several things. One, it said it expressly, in other words, the document itself and the vote itself adopted the Federation of State Medical Boards treatment protocol, which was anything but ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. Again, mind you, this is September 22nd of 2021, so I want that time frame to be in everyone's mind. The other thing it did is it actually adopted as a standard of care to not use those. You cannot adopt a standard of care. I mean, first, adopting a standard of care is quite uncommon unless, you know I saw the legislature did that through COVID, and even then that's questionable. But typically a standard of care is kind of, as the legislature calls it, it's what a reasonable, prudent physician would do. And when it was first adopted was within the medical community, meaning theoretically within the geographic community. Now, there's been some case law that basically is what a reasonable, prudent physician or physician's assistant would do in the state of Washington under the circumstances. And that's the standard of care. So it's very broad, and it allows a practitioner to use, that thing between the ears, right? The brain, which is what we want a doctor to do. Well, through this position statement, there was a standard of care adopted. Basically, it was not ivermectin, not hydroxychloroquine, because the FDA hadn't approved those for COVID-19 treatment. Now, circling back to the cases we're defending, these doctors, we've put the commission and said, listen, you're actually implementing this as a true standard of care. And I think I've talked about this. We brought that lawsuit in the federal court challenging the position statement that it infringes free speech, that it infringes the right to practice, that it infringes on the patient's right to informed consent. And our buddy Judge Rice up there has denied that. And we're still, we're in a motion to dismiss state on that case, where the motion was filed, we replied, and the state has now responded. And I would say within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we should hear back. And I expect, just outrightly for folks listening, I expect that case to get dismissed. I mean, Judge Rice has been pretty consistent on how he feels about COVID-19 litigation.
So let's talk about that case a little. Let's go a little deeper into that, because that's the federal case that we have right now that applies to medical freedom and also the First Amendment. What could we possibly see going? If you see it get dismissed, what's the appeal process? Is that something we're going to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, so when we filed in the Eastern District, we did so because we did with Dr. Wilkinson as the lead, right? And so it's where the plaintiff resides, unlike our cases that have gone to Thurston County, which is state court, so it's different there. But it's where the plaintiff resides. So we did that with Wilkinson as the leading edge of the sword. And so it was squarely, appropriately there. There are only 2 judges right now, because we've got several senior status judges, meaning they're basically quasi-retired. And I think we have 2 or 3 that are sitting to get confirmed by the Senate. And, anyone that pays attention to nationwide politics knows what a mess DC is. Not that it's any better ever, but
Well, and specifically the judges that they've
Yeah.
put in front to be appointed, it's scary.
Yes, when she can't answer what Article 2 is about, that's
Yeah.
frightening.
yeah, it's a mess. So anyway, we challenged the position statement and we claim that it's being enforced. And Rice said, well, it's not being enforced. Basically, the commission, so we sued the commissioners individually and the state of Washington, the medical commission itself.
So individually means that in their personal effects,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It doesn't mean that if we win and get damages, we're going to pull out of their pocket. Like I sue you and you're going to pay me. There's going to be some insurance kitty, essentially, that the commission would cover its commissioners. But there is an opportunity for damages, and we're claiming that and we're seeking that. And Rice basically, and the state has said so far, this case needs to be dismissed because these commissioners can't be sued. They have absolute immunity. By statute, they do. In other words, the legislature has protected these commissioners by saying there's no way they can get sued personally. And our claim is, well, no, F that. You know, you're violating their constitutional rights. Everyone has a right to have their rights upheld, even those we disagree with. And in this case, we're going to stand up and use their rights to advance the cause.
And federal law allows for that.
Yeah.
Federal law allows you to bring suits in their personal capacity if your rights have been violated by them. And so I think we take the position that that trumps this state statute granting them immunity.
Right. So we have one question in the chat, and it doesn't apply to this specific topic, but they're asking about suing Jay Inslee when that appropriate time would be, and they're asking if it's another governor sitting sue him. But I think that's the reason why I asked about suing them personally. I think that's really where people are at with this. We're wanting to hold these people accountable, and a lot of people are looking towards us or groups like us, though there are not very many out there, to hold these people accountable. So where do you think the accountability is going to be with this medical freedom? Where can we take this?
Look, I mean, I would love to sue Inslee in his personal capacity, but I don't think it's a successful lawsuit. I mean, look, there's an open question as to whether or not these commissioners can be protected, right? The law says they are fully protected. Case law states that we can sue for violations of civil rights, and I understand that would be the same type of claim against Jay Inslee, but the elected officials are so well protected. I mean, that's why we don't sue the state senators and other legislators for making bad law, right? I mean, people have asked us to do that on House Bill 1240. It's like, just tack them on. I think the protections, and this is across the board, it's not just statute. I think, case law throughout the country protects legislators or other elected officials in that capacity in so many ways. To sue Jay Inslee, I think it would just be spinning our wheels, and we'd get very little. And quite frankly, it's not going to change what he does. And as noted, he's already declared he's not going to run again. So to the question about another governor, like, even if we got somewhere, it'd be the next governor. And I think we're not going to pierce that veil of immunity for the governor. I mean, I don't see it. I wish I could say otherwise.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty tough, especially in this context where Washington law says that it's the Washington Medical Commission that has the expertise to decide these things. It's going to be pretty hard to sue Inslee based on what the Washington Medical Commission is doing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe the realm where it could happen, and this is just a thought, is something along the lines of a communication that he has where it's like, I know the shots don't work. I know that most people are going to get sick from them, but make them do it anyway, right? And when we've always talked about a smoking gun, right? And we thought we had as close or a pretty darn good version of a smoking gun with the Catherine Leathers, Jay Inslee's attorney. Okay, so there's the Office of the Attorney General, Bob Ferguson's, and they defend the state typically. But Jay Inslee in his staff has an attorney. It's not for Jay Inslee if he gets in a car accident driving home, right? It is for the office of the governor. So it's attached to Jay Inslee for now. This lady's name's Catherine Leathers, is the general counsel, meaning the lead attorney. And she had the email that we've used for, I don't know, 2 years now that says, in regards to exemptions, says, we will grant medical, yes. And then I think it says ellipses, ...
Religious if we have to.
Yep. And we thought that was the smoking gun that showed the discrimination, and judges left and right are just kind of like scoffing at that. So, you know, I mean, if back to the point of suing Jay Inslee and these other folks, I would love to, but if that one's not going to be good enough in court, then what is it going to take? And how are we going to get that, more importantly? You know, I think the government was pretty lazy early on, maybe cavalier. I don't know how maybe both lazy and cavalier, where they were communicating. But I mean, we've got several Public Records Act requests out that should result in hundreds or thousands of hits of just blatant discrimination, right? We've asked for stuff about gun rights. We've asked for stuff about medical freedom. We're going to ask for more about each and other cases. And really, they've largely not provided real fruit. You know, I mean, I've got stuff like Bob Ferguson's annual enforcement of gun rights. Like, that's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for specifics on a particular event, like a singular event. And I'm still not getting anywhere. And the question then becomes, like, how do we allocate our time to get that?
Right.
So I know that was a really long-winded answer to a pretty simple question, but I think it's important that people understand really the lay of the land of what we're looking at.
Right. I also think it's important to understand that the legal strategy and litigation is only one aspect of what we need to be doing. We need a holistic approach to conquering this. We as lawyers and within the courts cannot do it all. So we need political approaches. We need cultural approaches. We need the churches to step up. We need, you know, everybody to start doing everything they can. This means you're trying to elect good legislators. It means that you are actually talking to your legislators and telling them what you want. It means that you are, you know, going to your churches and saying, churches, you have to get involved. You have to start helping us educate people as to right and wrong and good and bad and what good governance is. It means, you know, it's this broad approach that we need if we are going to start walking back these big government issues. We haven't gotten into this problem overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. We didn't get into this problem just because of litigation. We're not going to get out of this problem through litigation only. So that is the other thing that we really, really need is we are going to fight as hard as we can. We are going to do everything we can, but we need everyone else to start stepping up and doing their part as well.
Well, and that's a big part of why we started doing the podcast. You know, our goal was always education. I'm forgetting the second. Advocacy, and then litigation, right? And because we're such a small group, we've targeted what we can corner the market on, and I hate to even put it that way, but we're one of the very few organizations doing litigation. Mm-hmm. And that's where my time and Karen's time is typically best served, right? Because there are only certain, as we talked about, maybe a couple dozen lawyers max in the state of Washington touching this, right? So we've always seen that as where we belong, but we also belong in the educational forefront, and that's why we're doing the podcast. And this is kind of my people always ask, like, what can I do? I mean, start listening and sharing the podcast, and you as a group of listeners, viewers, SMFers, come out and say, hey, we need you to help us. To your point, I got 500 people at my church really angry about medical freedom. Can you come down and talk to us, or can you zoom in on a Tuesday night, or whatever, and talk about medical freedom? And we have these 7 specific questions. Well, let's vet those questions, and if we've got good answers to them, we'll do it. Or maybe we can, make it an iterative process. So I think the call to action for me is always great. We're trying to reach out. We're trying through Substack. We're trying through more frequent touches, including this podcast, to bring that educational component. But to a degree, we can't necessarily provide education without knowing what the courses people want are, right?
Yeah. So, but kind of circling back, we're talking about medical freedom. You now had a number of cases under your belt, got a couple more coming through. What's something, if there are any doctors or medical providers listening to this, or even there, people who have a medical provider that they know are going through this, what's something that they can do to protect themselves? Is it organizing themselves as medical providers and to fight the medical commission? Is it practicing in a certain way? What is it that you see could potentially help these doctors?
Well, I think one thing that I've been noticing, and I can't verify this via the numbers, but it seems to be a pattern, is that functional medicine doctors or holistic type doctors are the ones who tend to be targeted. Because of that, it might be helpful if some of those doctors started trying to get onto the commission and started trying to kind of guide the commission and help them understand what their practice looks like and why. That was something at Wilkinson's hearing that I was impressed by, for lack of a better term, is that one of the doctors, well, both of the doctors, seemed very confused by this idea of functional and holistic medicine. They couldn't understand why anybody would even do it, and how they decided to treat in what ways, right? And so I think that is some of the education that the doctors themselves could begin to do for the commission.
Yeah, I think that'd be extremely beneficial, because then, theoretically you'd have a less intrusive commission. I think just the starting point of organize yourselves, right? If you're especially in a smaller community, like Yakima, not picking on it, but that's where Wilkinson was. He did have a group, kind of a support system early on. I don't know how much that group has stayed together, but I think, organize yourself with like-minded folks. And then if you have questions, the whole reason we ended up with Wilkinson is because his group reached out, right? And I'm not saying that we can answer every phone call, every email, every request for assistance. Unfortunately, we can't. But he was organized. He had a group. He was bringing us to several practitioners that were looking at finding ways to be prepared. And so, it's simple stuff. Obviously, we've learned a lot. We look at, I look at how doctors, just the progression of the doctors that we're defending, disclaimers on their websites. Things like that I hate to put it out there, but there's stuff that you can use to protect yourself.
Right.
Karen talked about where the commission can regulate speech. And it's not just standard speech, it's what's called commercial speech. So when you're advertising, You know, the question is, what type of claims are you making with this advertising? And there is, and I think it's somewhat, and I'm not going to just wholeheartedly agree, but somewhat of an appropriate approach to commercial speech regulation. You know, obviously, if I say, take this medicine and you'll never die, I don't want that to be out there, right? And I think we can all agree that there are certain baselines, like that's a lie. You can't sell that. It's the snake oil, right? And so just looking at how, again, going back to that, what's the disclaimer look like, and how do you communicate the effectiveness of your product in a way that's it's not going to touch on that commercial speech that could be regulated. I'm not saying it always can be, but sometimes. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of just basic, you know, get your groups together. We're happy to help where we can.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing that we've seen repeatedly, if they can't get you on anything else, they will get you on record keeping. So be up to date on your record keeping, keep as much detail as you possibly can. And I say that realizing that to try and put in too much is going to take away from patient care. So you need to make it, you know, you need to balance that somewhat. But also systematize your record keeping. That's what doctors can do. That would be a huge help for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That organization is critical.
So we wanted to kind of get into, we've kind of given a timeline of what happened through COVID. And then, you know, since then, which doctors, their licenses have been in jeopardy, and we're working our way through those. But what's going on currently that we're watching as far as the medical field goes? I think we're seeing some debates that are going to be coming out. And Joe Rogan's throwing some invites out there to debate the efficacy of some of these vaccines. What else are we seeing out there that, you know, other studies that are bearing fruit that we think may ultimately be in our favor?
Well, it's not just the effectiveness of the vaccine; it's the long-lasting effects. You know, I mean, Ryan Cole's one of our plaintiffs in the case with Wilkinson, and he and other doctors that are pathologists are finding there are potential links to cancer. So, you know, I think that's going to bear some fruit. Question of whether or not shots were not only ineffective but actually caused higher increased or earlier mortality. I mean,
well, increased hospitalization and death from COVID. So we know from the Cleveland Clinic studies, there have been 2 of them now. The first one was bad. The second one was worse. And these studies were done in healthcare workers who were forced to be vaccinated and many of them forced to be boosted. And what the most recent study showed was that the more you were boosted, the higher your chances of getting COVID became. In fact, the efficacy went into negative territory. So as much as -8, you had an 8% higher chance of getting COVID with more boosters than you had with none. So that's going to, I think, bear out fruit. We are also seeing reports that the CDC director Walensky and Fauci knew in January of 2021, so this is a month after the vaccine rollout, that there were breakthrough cases and that the vaccine efficacy was not what they were claiming.
and we know that they knew at least as early as, unquestionably, I'm recalling September of 21. I want to say
July
June or
of
July of
21.
20. Yeah.
July of 21.
You know, that they were aware that breakthrough cases were, I don't want to say common, but certainly not uncommon. So, you know.
Yeah, bad enough that they reinstituted the mask mandates and the distancing mandates and all of that for the vaccinated. They knew that the vaccines did not stop infection or transmission. They knew this.
and still pushed it.
Yep. And, you know, and it looks like there's a CDC. They had the MMWR was like monthly monitoring weekly report or something like that. I've got one up on my computer right now from 2022, which was a study of adolescents. I think it was like 13 to 17, then like 18 to 21 or 22. And it showed the increase of myo and pericarditis of these individuals, and it contrasted boys versus girls. But it's pretty much a tacit admission that the CDC, if they're tracking increased cases with vaccinated and unvaccinated kids with myo and pericarditis, they were well aware of it. So, I mean, I think all that information is coming to a head, but, you know, I'm going to go real touchy here. And you want to know the medical freedom issues that are probably most concerning in the state of Washington and that are going to precipitate throughout this country, and we're seeing it all across the board, is gender affirming care.
Yeah.
And let's call it for what it is. It's gender manipulating care. You know, you have kids that are, for whatever reason, socially struggling, and teachers and other people in places of authority or perceived authority who are telling them to think one way, and that one way happens to be, you're not who you are, you're someone else. And so through this manipulation and through the state of Washington's legislative manipulation of the medical industry, gender affirming care, as they call it, is highly protected, such that there's a potential that, well, there's not a potential. The state has told courts, if you get a subpoena for out-of-state records, you can quash that.
You have
meaning,
to quash
you
it.
have to quash that. Meaning, a quash of a subpoena is like it's just a squash of a bug, right? Like you can annihilate it. You can ignore it. Nowhere have I seen legislation say you can quash a subpoena.
Whether you have to quash a
Yeah.
subpoena, and this has got to be unconstitutional.
Yeah. And I think the most attractive way to win that fight is to get the attorneys general from Montana and Idaho, Utah, Nevada, you know, some other states to bring that lawsuit. But insofar as they haven't, it's going to fall on somebody. And, you know, Karen and I were progressing through several other cases. Of course, we continually say we're not going to take X type of case, then we take more of it. And, you know, we're really trying to get through some of the stuff we have to get to protect our doctors, like the medical commission lawsuits. And really the next step is looking at those bills and really figuring out, you know, I want to be clear here. We've heard so much about Senate Bill 5599, very little about House Bill 1469, which is the more egregious element. That's its House companion. And we're starting to hear more about that from kind of the more conservative group. These are not easy lawsuits.
No.
And no lawsuit is easy, but I want to be clear, so I'll speak clearly. House Bill 1469 and Senate Bill 5599 were not built in a day. They're built on a decade of bad legislation. Piece by piece, it's the Legos, right? And it's not even like when you get Legos, you get that giant base piece. They started with the tiniest pieces, the detail pieces, and built on that, and the base piece was 5599 and 1469. So they did the inverse because we weren't paying attention. And so anyone that thinks that we can just slap a lawsuit on 5599 or 1469, you're grossly erring. When it gets done, it'll get done right, but it's going to take time. And that puts our kids at risk until XYZ time. When we ask for funding, it's not because we're going to play with it. We want to hire another attorney. My goal is 2 to 3 more attorneys, some other people to work on fundraising, some people to help us in the office, so that when Karen and Austin and I'm not sitting and saying, okay, Austin, you got bandwidth for half a case, Karen's got bandwidth for half a case, and I've got bandwidth for a collective one more case. Which one is it, right? If we had 2 or 3 more attorneys, we bring those people on and say, you're going to do 5599 and 1469. You're going to work with this new person to do that. We'll be here to support you. We'll be here to help you. But until we have that case, as important as it is going to sit. because I don't want to screw it up. That's the other thing
Yeah,
is
it has
we're
got
not
to be
gonna
done right.
we're not gonna slap it together and just put lipstick on a pig and say this is gender affirming pig care, right? Like this has to get done correctly. Otherwise, we lose way more ground than we've ever gained. The legislation sucks. It's bad. But for us to screw this up because we're rushing it or there's pressure, like unnecessary time pressure, it's not going to work. Now, if there are other organizations listening out there that are seriously contemplating doing it or funding it, call us, email us. We're happy to co-counsel. Heck, I'm happy to let someone else run with it.
Yeah.
But as it sits, I've consistently pulsed and we've got some folks who are very well connected, politically and within similar movements. No one's ready to touch this. So I expect it's going to fall on us. So we're preparing for it, but preparing may mean more time than people want to give until we have the resources to actually jump at it. So I know that was kind of touchy there, but I want to, I know that's like the most important thing on people's minds, like what's going on there. We have to discuss that. And until we can get to where we're comfortable bringing a case that we think can win, because as much as Karen and I say, yeah, quashing subpoenas from out of state is unconstitutional, we still have to write it up. We still have to get the research. We still have to get it. I mean, we have judges that are kicking us to Thurston County left and right, and so I only use that as a temperature. Judges that we think would stand with us from an ideological standpoint, they're not willing to hear a gun case. You think they want to hear a transgender kid case? Probably not, especially with the laws that are coming down affirming Title IX from the Biden's administration's implementation, which is not that it protects women's sports, but it protects trans kids' sports. And so you have these federal laws that are really going to heavily impact how we do this. And, we're in the state of Washington, which is not friendly to our position on these issues.
Now, having said that, sign the petition
Yeah.
for 5590 to repeal 5599. Get out there and get that petition signed and tell people how important it is. There are petitions all over the state and people gathering petitions. There's some here in the office in Clark County. Bethel Community Church has them out every Sunday morning. You can go sign there. I'm sure there are other places that have them out.
We have them here in our office,
Yeah, that's
for
Benton County, it's here in the office.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah.
We don't have a whole lot of foot traffic here, but
No, but we're here.
we're here, and if you want to come visit us, it'd be great.
Yeah, and look, I mean, again, I don't want to get on a bent here about how difficult that case is. Karen's right. Signing that petition, you want to do something, vote with your signature, and that's one of it. And we are extremely grateful to the organizations that have put that together. And there are two petitions there. There's a gun rights petition. Grateful for those organizations as well. I mean, look, everyone has to, the term that I've used, that I've adopted from church stuff is lift where you stand, right? Like whatever you can do, however you can do it, do it. For some people that's prayer. Some people that's donations. Some people that's signing a petition. Some people it's writing a petition. Some people it's joining us and actually litigating with us. I don't know what your skill set is, but obviously you're engaged somehow because you're listening, interacting with us. So, your call to action is do what you can.
Right. You said something about judges, perhaps in their personal life, agreeing with us ideologically, but passing the buck ultimately. And from my perspective, what I'm seeing is that the general public or Joe Public could really make a difference in those cases for us if they were louder and they were doing more, talking more, and expressing their feelings, and letting these judges know the public is not behind that decision. The public is very much in contrary to what we're doing to our kids and what we're doing ideologically, and we really need to get our ideology out there, right? Because it's a vacuum right now, and it's being filled with that that Marxist, communist, socialist ideology, and we're not putting enough out there to push it out. You know, everything has an equal and opposite, right? So we need to have that opposite ideology as an alternative to what they're pushing on us and pushing at us. And those of you listening can, that's what you can do, is you can let your ideology speak up, talk about it, be, you know, stand where, like you said, lift where you are and stand up for it. And it's not just signing the petition one time and hoping that it goes out to the ether and does something, but signing the petition and voting and then going to your school board and going to your city council and being active in your community and talking to your friends and letting them know they can be, and supporting them in their thoughts and how they feel, and getting active in your church and what you're doing in your community with your church. So much more that we can do that we think is simple or little, but those things add up so much. And it's frustrating from the litigation side, at least for my part. I'm sitting here watching, okay, I know this is right. This is the right perspective. I know our argument's the right argument. But I don't think the judge is being persuaded because the public's not supporting it, at least not loudly enough.
Yes, so don't be the silent majority. Let's go be the loud majority. Let's speak up. And just wanted to back up to the petitions one more time. Everybody needs to understand that the amount of time that we have to get enough signatures for these petitions is very short. So don't put off signing it. Do it as soon, this week, because we need to get those signatures now. It's only a matter of weeks, and we need
a couple hundred thousand.
A couple 100,000 signatures.
What's the date? Is it after July 4th?
I think it's July 17th, if I recall.
So everyone, if you can, anybody that can, pick up a sheet and take it to your July 4th party. You know, we're all going to be going one with 10 to 20 to 50 people, and get everybody to sign it. And everybody that's signing, that's celebrating the 4th of July, is celebrating freedom. And that's exactly what these petitions are all about.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I know we're focused on medical freedom, but I do want to pivot for one quick second. I did a video the other day, and I know Bill Kirk's done a similar video about what happened at the Gorge, and there was a shooting incident, and it literally was the scenario that we play out in our gun rights cases, that a good guy with a gun took down a bad guy, or a guy that was effed in the head and doing bad things with a gun. And I know I've already shouted this out, but that good guy happened to be Edgar Salazar, former owner of Guardian Arms and plaintiff in our House Bill 1240 case. We represent a lot of really cool people, these doctors, Scott Millers of the world, who are saving lives, literally taking people out of the hospital to save their lives. And then to see one of our gun rights plaintiffs, who's active duty police officer and protecting his community, and literally there, like, stopping what could have been it was a bad incident. It could have been a tremendously catastrophic incident. And, Salazar, man, you're definitely in our prayers, brother. And we appreciate the work you do to keep our community safe. And that goes out to all law enforcement, firefighters, folks like that, our first responders. You're awesome. We appreciate you putting it on the line for us, for our families. But, Salazar, you definitely have a special place in our heart, and tremendous shout of gratitude, because, I love going to concerts at the Gorge. Not a huge Jack Johnson fan, but had an awesome concert with PJ, my wife, because it's got that great backdrop of the Gorge, and you're in the amphitheater, and it's grassy. And like, if you've not been there, it's such a cool place to see a concert like that. Anyway, Salazar, you're a stud, man. We really appreciate it. And, just to roll it in to the plug, tomorrow we got our hearing on House Bill 1240. It's going to be a big one, temporary restraining order. It might be that we might get it granted, we might not. We know that our next step is an injunction, and then go from there. But if we can get this temporary restraining order, at least for that several week window that we get it granted, my hope is that every mom and pop shop and other gun store gets flooded. Like, hey man, you got my gun sitting on the shelf. It's collecting dust. I'm done. Like, I hope they're, it's like when a Krispy Kreme or In-N-Out opens up. Everyone wants to go in and, taste the first, right? Like, I hope that's how it looks if we were able to get that TRO. So keep praying for us and keep supporting us.
For sure. Well, we're up on the hour time, and we've had a few viewers. It's been a great conversation. Any closing remarks from you, Karen?
No, I just thank all of our supporters and just keep praying for us because it's a lot of work and we just need the support in all ways.
For sure. Pete?
No, I mean, it's the same thing. I'm grateful that I get to do this job. I always say it. It's the dumbest job ever. I shouldn't have it. I wish we had a country that was the country I believed in, and we're trying to make it that country too. We are an amazing, blessed, God-given, God-granted, free nation. We just have to keep fighting to remind our politicians that.
Definitely. Well, I think that's good for the day, and thanks for tuning in. This has been Rob and Pete, and we had Karen join us today. That's awesome. We want to keep on doing this. Send out your questions, comments. Let us know if there's any topics that you particularly want us to talk on. We'd like to answer any questions and get you involved. This is all about getting our community involved in what we're doing and letting everybody feel like they've got a voice, because we don't want to be the silent majority anymore. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you later.